Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Science and Art of Equity. We're going to be talking today about practical steps that you can take to move toward a more just classroom. I really thank you for taking a little time out of your summer to think about this incredibly important topic. Before we begin, just a couple of frequently asked questions. First of all, a recording of this will be available. So if you'd like to see more of my smiling face and listen to anything that we discussed, again, you can check that recording out. Also, there is a resources document, which is available. If you click over on the side on one of those tabs, you'll be able to see the resources document with all of the things that we're discussing today, and also a deeper dive into each of these subpoints. And last but certainly not least, we have helpful Heather waiting in the wings. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm looking forward to the webinar.
Excellent, and she will be around to answer any tech questions or issues that you might have. Just go ahead and send her a chat in the chat feature, and she will be happy to help you out. Also want to mention that we are sponsored by Blue Apple Projects, incredible supports for teachers who want to help their students make the world a better place, which is extremely relevant for what we are discussing today. So I strongly encourage you to head on over to blueappleteacher.org, and check them out. And the last thing we want to do before we really dive into this is just find out who is here. So Heather, if you could go ahead and open that first poll up. I am curious who we have in attendance today. So just really quickly indicate whether you teach K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12, or whether you are an administrator or any of those other incredibly important jobs that are involved in education. Heather, you want to give them just a couple more seconds to put their answer in and then share out what we see.
Yeah, so we have 17% lower elementary, 44% upper elementary, 33% middle school, 11% high school, and 6% admin or other.
Outstanding. So lots in that 3 through 8 range. Incredibly important when students are forming their perspectives on all sorts of issues that affect our world. And so this is an extremely important topic for those students and really for everybody. So I am excited to get started. We're going to give you the agenda for the day. We're first of all going to talk about the elephant. Then we're going to talk about the science and the art of equity. And we're going to finish with some practical steps, some things that you can implement in your classroom right away. Small steps, but bold ones to move in the direction of greater equity and greater justice. So let's begin. First of all, the elephant in the room. I am the elephant in the room because I am extremely white, extremely male, solidly middle class. And I have not had the same experience with some of these issues that other people have. But it's still something that I care a lot about. And that's important because there are a lot of people who are in my boat. And the more people we can get pulling the world in the right direction, the stronger we can all be together. Maybe you are in that situation where you're trying to listen and to learn more about issues related to equity and justice. And if that's the case, then we're really excited that you are joining that team, pulling the world in a little wiser direction. It's a famous quote, justice can't be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Of course, that quote was said by Ben Franklin, who was a slave owner. And so it's important that we think not only about our thoughts, having right thoughts and right words, but also about right actions which move the world in a more just direction. We're going to think about that today as well. And that really comes, for those of us who don't have some of those experiences, from listening and from empathy. It's important to remember that none of us have all the answers and that we can gain so much from listening to the insights and the input of other human beings. We're stronger when we practice empathy. So that's the first step, I think, in promoting equity. If we can do that, if we can get lots of people from diverse backgrounds listening to each other and working together, that's where we can tackle the big challenges, the big sharks of a problem out there. There is strength in numbers. And if we can all be pulling in just and equitable directions, we are more and more powerful. To me, in my mind, it's really about learning to think outside of just yourself and your own experiences. We want to go from thinking about just ourselves or a very small group, maybe our family around us or our community, to learning to think about all of us as being part of the same team and really caring about what happens to people who are very different from us. The more that we can think that all of us are part of that same we, instead of a they, the stronger we can be. It's about moving toward altruism. Great quote from Martin Luther King Jr. there that speaks to something very fundamental about being human. That when we learn to think about others in front of ourselves, we all benefit. Move away from the darkness of destructive selfishness and toward the light of creative altruism. That's the essence, the heart that you have to have in order to promote and pursue equity. So that is the elephant in the room. But I hope that talking about that helps you think about how, no matter your background, you can be motivated by bigger ideals like love and peace and justice, and you can help move your class, your school, your community, your world toward more equity and more justice. Now, if we want to do that, it's important that we think clearly about what equity is. And there are all sorts of incredible visuals which help us understand the difference between equity and equality, because lots of times people get that confused. So understanding this essential point is a great place to start. These are some of the classic illustrations, the cartoons of this situation. In all of those situations, you see that equality involves providing everybody with exactly the same thing, regardless of what they need or how it will benefit them. In the situations which discuss equity, we're providing people with what they need, with different supports, with different tools in order to access what they need in order to grow and thrive. That's the heart of equity, making sure that people get what they need. Not that everybody gets the same thing, but that people get what they need in order to grow and thrive. Now, these illustrations have been criticized because they do show the people as different fundamental heights. And the situation when we think about equity is not that people groups have different capacities or different abilities. People groups have the same identical capacities and abilities, but the world is structured in such a way that the playing field isn't always level and that the barriers to thriving are not always equal. So I think this is a little bit stronger illustration of the concept. Here in the equality picture, we've given everybody the same box, and some people are able to thrive and some are not. But here we can see visually represented that that's because the playing field and the barriers are not equal. And so what we do in a situation where we create equity is we provide customized supports and tools to our students so that all of those students have what they need in order to grow and thrive. This next one is my favorite of the illustrations. It starts off thinking about inequality, where only some students get what they need in order to grow, in order to learn. The equality situation involves giving people exactly the same thing as it has in the other illustrations as well. Equity involves customizing those supports. And in all honesty, this is where we're going to spend a lot of time in the classroom, because you can provide your students with just what they need in order to be successful. But it also goes a step beyond that. It thinks about encouraging us to help bend that tree in the first place, to change the way that structures exist so that things aren't as unequal in the first place, so that playing field is not tilted in the first place. So this gets us thinking about moving beyond equity toward justice. Now, it's important to note that just because there are some additional or variable structures here, some variable tools, these students over here still have what they need in order to grow and thrive. What we're trying to do is provide classrooms where every student gets what they need. Every student gets what they need to thrive and grow. And you know what? You've been doing that already. Education has always been about giving students what they need in order to thrive. The whole idea of the zone of proximal development recognizes that students need different things in order to be successful. You've been doing that in your classroom. And when you do that, you promote equity. So when we think about that in a deeper and more intentional way, we think about equity in a deeper and more intentional way too. Remember, it's about getting every student, even the ones who started off just fine, making sure that they can still thrive, but making sure that that's not just a situation for a privileged few, that opportunity is extended to everyone. So this is the definition of equity in the classroom: customizing supports and structures to recognize and address unequal opportunity. Recognize it. Be aware of the fact that it exists and then do what we can to fix the problem. Now, that begins with us understanding the I, understanding individual students and the characteristics that influence them in our classroom. And that really gets to the art of equity. When we think about our students, when we think about them as individuals, there are lots of different factors which influence the way in which they go about their lives, the way in which they interact with the world, and the way in which they interact with our classrooms. Some of those are things like race or nationality. Other things which characterize your students and which might influence the way in which they interact with your classroom are things like their socioeconomic status, their gender or orientation, their religion, whether or not they have a disability or not, whether or not they've experienced trauma. All of those things are characteristics which are relevant to understanding your students deeply. If we want to help each individual student, we need to understand the factors which influence the way that they experience education. It might be things that we wouldn't think of right away. If a student has been retained, for example, and they're getting picked on because they're older than their peers, well, that's an important factor for how they experience learning. Maybe they're going through a difficult divorce. If that's the situation, being aware of that and how that might influence their life and their educational experience, that's part of being a great teacher. The interests that they have, their appearance. Maybe they're getting bullied for getting braces or for being overweight. Understanding all of the different facets of your students, understanding your students deeply is a huge key for equity. We need to understand where our students are coming from. We need to understand their lived experiences and how those impact their education. I love this illustration. It shows the different thoughts that might be going through your students' heads. This is by no means an exhaustive list, of course, but you can see the diversity of perspectives that students bring, the diversity of distractions that might exist out there. So you're teaching them about English language arts, where some students are thinking about what's for dinner tonight, and others might be thinking about whether or not they're even going to get dinner. Great teachers understand their students and understand their students deeply. And that understanding is the heart of the foundation of equitable educational practice. This is an incredible truth that we keep circling back to, that equity begins with empathy. It begins with seeking to understand our students, to understand their experiences, listening to them, so that we can be more informed about how they interact with our classroom. Now, let's take just a moment to reflect. Education, teaching is a difficult job. And I know this was not something that I always did as well as I wanted to. Where do you feel you are on the equity continuum? Do you feel like you're just getting started, that you're off to a good start, that you've done a lot of work in this domain, or that you are truly an equity superstar? This is 100% anonymous, so don't worry about being honest here. In fact, honesty is a really important consideration when we think about improving ourselves with regard to our equitable practices. So go ahead and take just a moment and fill that out. Where do you feel that you are in this walk? Heather, if you want to give them just another couple of seconds to make their picks. And then close that poll out and tell us what we see. I'm really curious.
Yeah, so 0% have a long way to go. 46% feel that they're off to a good start. Another 46% feel that they're almost there, and 8% feel that they're equity superstars.
Outstanding. And you have taken some intentional effort to learn more about this topic. This is something that's really interesting to you. And so you are definitely off to a good start at the very least. So appreciate those teachers who have really invested time and energy in improving their practice in this regard. So let's talk about some steps that you can take, maybe to move up that continuum a little bit. And even if you are a superstar, we know that there's always room for improvement, no matter what we're talking about. So let's think about some small, bold steps that we can take. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but good things to be aware of as we strive towards self-improvement. Now, one thing that always occurs to me here is that sometimes it feels overwhelming. Sometimes it feels like our efforts are a drop in the bucket. That those steps are small. But by making them bold, by making them intentional, you do have an impact. Those drops in the bucket, those ripple out. And one thing that I've realized since I've stepped out of the classroom is how powerful teachers are. The words that you say, the actions that you practice, those things impact your students' lives, and your students' lives impact the world in ways that sometimes we can't even imagine. So thank you. Thank you for every small, bold step that you take. It does make a difference. The first small, bold step is to be intentional about understanding our students' worlds. Ignorance is the most ferocious enemy justice can have, especially when it's allied with power. And as teachers, we do have power. Our actions do have significant power, consequences. So when we educate ourselves, we fight against injustice. Lots of different ways that we can do that. Or reflect on your own practice. You were just honest about where you are on your walk toward greater and greater equity. Reflecting on how your upbringing might shape your perspectives in ways that you don't want to own. Reflecting on that can be the first step toward overcoming those implicit biases. Being aware of the language that we use, being really intentional about crafting our language in a way that's inclusive. Sometimes people rail against politically correct language, but that language matters. It shapes the way that your students interact in your classroom, and thinking carefully about the words that you choose and how you include instead of exclude with your words, that's really valuable. It's important for us to read. This is a great way to expand our perspectives. We can always learn a lot by looking through an author's eyes and hearing about his or her perspectives. A couple of great books there, and also in the hyperdoc, in the resource document, there is a recommended reading list for you to check out. A great book there about socioeconomic status and the way that that impacts students' experiences in the classroom, or about how disability status can impact education, or how trauma, The Body Keeps Score, great book about trauma. So wherever your students are and whatever you need to learn more about, we tell our students to read, let's do that ourselves. Read up on the topics that are relevant to you and to your students. It's important that we're aware of the facts, the mathematical, statistical realities that exist out there in the world. And we're educated that knowledge is power, right? Teachers believe knowledge is power, and so learn about these issues. That's a graph of infant mortality between Black mothers and white, and how even at different educational levels, at every educational level, Black mothers have a much higher infant mortality rate. That really speaks to and reflects an eye-opening reality about the inequalities that still exist in our society. There's one about the difference between the household wealth of people in the upper 10th percentile and the bottom 50th percentile. It really opens eyes when you understand the mathematical, statistical realities. This is about self-harm behavior for cisgender and transgender students. Being aware of that reality can really ground your perceptions in the truth of what's actually happening. And last but certainly not least, a great way to educate yourself is to listen, because every student interacts with these factors in a different way. They process them in idiosyncratic fashions. And listening to your students, opening up those great conversations, those deep conversations, is a powerful way that you can educate yourself about your students and their lived experiences. And we can do that both individually as teachers and corporately. One great small, bold step that you can take is to have age-appropriate conversations about difficult and important topics with your students. Think about your own practice. Is there a way that you can incorporate more corporate conversations, more collaborative dialogue around these issues with your students? So we're going to share a couple of strategies that you can use to educate yourself and your students and to promote empathy, help students understand the value of all sorts of types of diversity. The first one is called open their gifts. Diversity means that your students have different gifts. They're all unique. And this is a strategy about honoring and showing value for their diverse gifts. In the resource document, we have a tool where you can identify some student strengths and have some tasks or jobs or roles suggested so that you can go to a student and say, I noticed that you are really good at this, or that you have this experience. Would you be willing to help us as a classroom by doing Y? When you show students that you value and recognize their unique talents and gifts, you encourage students to value diversity and to empathize with students and to value students who are different than they are. Incorporating literature is an incredibly powerful strategy that you can use. Good literature helps you see the world through the eyes of the protagonist. And that's the essence of empathy. So getting literary and being intentional about the way that literature can help students understand the world through someone else's eyes is an incredibly powerful, bold step that you can take. Here's one that I always fell victim to. Our world encourages us to praise achievement. You did this. You accomplished this. But kindness is at least as, or perhaps more important. Acts of empathy, acts of generosity. When we go out of our way to praise those as much as we praise achievement, we create a kinder and more equitable classroom. We use bingo, choice boards for all sorts of different things in our classrooms. We can do the same thing with kindness or with empathy. Constructing a kindness or empathy bingo board can be a great fun way for your students to have some choice, to think about what they are going to do in advance, and then to practice those skills and those characteristics that we want to encourage. And another really important strategy that you can put into practice in your classroom is to share stories of kindness or empathy heroes. We learn from seeing in action. We learn by observing models. And so if we want our students to grow up to be empathetic people right now, then we need to share models of what that looks like, maybe in a classroom or maybe in the broader society. When we provide our students with positive models, that's a powerful step that we can take to encourage and promote empathetic, equitable behavior. So I'm curious, just thinking about some of those ideas. There are lots of ideas for ways that you can promote empathy and equity in your classroom. But looking at just those 5, which of those would you like to try? Heather's opened that poll up. If you could go ahead and indicate which of those is appealing to you. Oh, I'm sorry, I incorporated the hear each other strategy in here. That's my mistake. I apologize for that. That's a great strategy for helping students learn explicitly how to stop, halt, empathize with another student. Recognize that there's going to be value in that conversation. That's described in your resource hyperdoc. Another great strategy for promoting empathy and equity. It's important for us to intentionally teach students how to do some of these skills. I really like that one. Check that out in the resource doc. All right, Heather, what do we have for our poll results?
So 52% would like to try use their gifts, 36% get literary, 60% praise kindness, 16% are interested in the hear each other, and then 44% kindness heroes.
Yeah, I bet that 16% is because I completely forgot to describe that when we started. The other ones seem to be well received. That's awesome. I love that praise kindness as much as achievement. I love to keep a tally chart and just think about think intentionally about what I'm praising, what I'm valuing in the classroom. Thank you so much. And I hope that you're able to put those into practice this school year as we move from just learning about issues related to equity to real action. We want to think about how we can combat stereotypes in our classroom. Make sure that when you're showing scientists, you're showing people who come from groups that are historically underrepresented in the sciences, right? We want to combat those stereotypes. Stereotype threat can inhibit our students from achieving what they're capable of. And so when we work against those stereotypes by who we show in our classroom, that plays a role in moving from education to action in the classroom. We want to celebrate diversities. There are all sorts of different diversities that exist in your classroom. Different ethnic backgrounds, different perspectives on the world, different achievements and abilities. Celebrate all sorts of different diversities because diversity of perspective, diversity strengthens us. Other things that you can do to provide or to cultivate equity in your classroom, provide choice. If you have diverse students, they shouldn't all have to do the same thing. So incorporate choice as far as the content that students can study, the process that they can use to study it, or the product that they can use to display their knowledge. Providing choice is a way to promote equity. And this one's so important. Believe in your students. Believe that all of your students can achieve, and go out of your way to express that belief. That'd be a great thing you could take away from this, is just think about how you can go out of your way to express the fact that you believe in your students, each and every one of them, in a really intentional, well-structured way. Maybe you mark it out on your calendar. Maybe you put every student on the calendar and say, on this day, I'm going to reach out and express my belief that this student can succeed. Believe in your students. Incredible, powerful, bold step. And advocate. In your classroom, in your school, think about the structures and the way that they exist. And if there is injustice there, advocate against it. Advocate for justice, so we can bend the moral arc of that universe. We can do it if we work together. Now, the last tool I'm going to share is an incredibly powerful one that I'm extremely passionate about, because it involves incorporating students in this process as well. I am a huge advocate for project-based learning, because in PBL, we can help our students play a role in this process of bending that moral arc of the universe. Project-based learning, after all, is based on solving real, authentic problems. And issues of equity and inequality are real-world problems, the very kind of problems that PBL is uniquely suited to address. So think about your students, their backgrounds, the things that influence their lives and their educations, how some students are carrying the weight of the world, and think about how you can empower them to make a difference, how you can show them that they have a voice, that they can be chain breakers, that they can promote peace and justice, fairness in our world. Think about ways that you can empower them to be kind, good human beings. Now, to structure these experiences, you can think about the problems that students experience, work together to develop a plan to address those issues of inequity. You can integrate academics into that experience, and then you can put your ideas into action. Find problems that your students care a lot about, plan together for how to solve those. As you work on those plans, you will discover that math and writing and reading and science and social studies, that those matter. They are helpful as we seek to solve problems together and put those ideas into action, have an impact outside of the walls of your classroom. That's the essence of PBL. It promotes student empowerment, deeper application of learning, better engagement and improved retention, but more importantly, it helps you and your students to change the world. Now, it's difficult. Teachers have lots to do, and that's why we built Blue Apple Projects, so that you have clean, clear lesson plans and lots of support, so that you can do the kind of teaching that you really want, the kind of teaching that changes the world. You also have a project coach, me, or one of my colleagues, to come alongside you, because we all need support, no matter who we are. So I encourage you to go and check out those projects, whether you're interested in environmental justice or economic justice, or just helping your students to stand up for what they believe in. There's a project that you can use to help make the world a better place. Now, it always feels a little icky to use something to think about sales or selling things when you're dealing with an issue as important as issues of equity and justice. So just want to point out that you can use ESSER funding. There was a webinar discount code offered at the beginning, but also we never want money to come between these projects and teachers. So if you want, send me an email right now, ben.telsma@vai.org, and I will write you a code for 50% off any project you would like. Or if you feel that it's more appropriate for your situation, just write me that email and let me know, and I will give you a code for a free project. Again, we don't want money to come between teachers and great teaching, teachers and the supports that would help them do great teaching. It's too important for that. So I'd love it for you to send me an email right now, ben.telsma@vai.org. I will set you up with 50% off or a free project, your choice, based on your circumstances, your situation, because we care, we value the work that you do. It really is incredibly important and valuable as we seek to work together to change the world, to make it more equitable and more just. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for all of the work that you do.